All right, welcome back to today's Explainer. We are literally stepping back in time to a moment when the United States, when it completely broke apart at the seams. We're talking about the election of 1860 and the road to secession. I mean, just imagine a time when tensions were running so incredibly high that a single presidential election didn't just spark some angry debates, it actually caused half the country to pack up and leave. So, let's dive into the what, the why, and the how of this absolute defining crisis in American history.
Zero. Yeah, you heard me right, zero. That is the exact number of Southern electoral votes Abraham Lincoln needed to win the presidency back in 1860. I want you to just think about that for a second. A candidate became president of the entire United States without carrying a single solitary state from the South. His electoral votes came almost entirely from northern states, plus a few out west. So this number, zero, it instantly sets up our core conflict for today. It proved without a doubt that the country was so fundamentally divided that a leader could take the absolute highest office in the land without appealing to or frankly even being supported by a massive chunk of the nation. Crazy, right?
Okay, part one, the breaking point. So that brings us to a huge question. How does one election cause an entire country to just split in half? Really try to imagine the extreme tension, the fear, and honestly the anger required to tear a whole nation in two. This wasn't just a simple political disagreement where the losing side says, we'll try again in 4 years. No way. This was a full-blown existential crisis. The southern states genuinely felt like their entire way of life was in immediate, absolute peril.
Now, to understand what happened next, we really need to nail down the word secession. Basically, it's when a state formally declares, hey, we're leaving the United States, and completely rejects federal authority. And look, this was not some peaceful protest march. It was an extreme, legally unrecognized step. Several southern states chose to secede because they truly believed their rights, especially the right to keep and expand the institution of slavery, were under direct attack. So by breaking away, they actually formed their own totally separate government, the Confederate States of America. Suddenly, you've got two separate governments claiming control over the exact same land and the same people. Talk about pushing national unity right over the edge.
Which leads us to part two, a deeply divided map.
Like we talked about, Lincoln won the presidency without a single southern state. But it's actually wilder than that. He wasn't even on the ballot in many of them. You literally couldn't have voted for him down there if you tried. So for Southerners, this was terrifying proof that they were completely 100% politically outnumbered. To them, it proved they had lost their political voice and any national influence they once had. They suddenly realized the North had enough population and electoral power to just pick a president all by themselves. That's a scary thought if you're on the losing side.
All right, let's look at part three, perception versus reality. Here's where things get really tragic. During his campaign, Lincoln clearly explicitly promised not to abolish slavery where it already existed. Now, he did firmly oppose its expansion into new territories, but he wasn't going to touch it where it was. But slaveholders definitely did not see it that way. They perceived him as a massive direct threat, basically believing that stopping the expansion was just a sneaky first step toward total abolition. This right here, it's a classic, devastating example of how acting on fear and suspicion, instead of stated facts and a real desire for understanding, leads directly to a massive, unstoppable crisis.
Moving on to part four, the secession chain reaction.
Guys, the pacing of this fallout was just staggering. It was like a giant row of dominoes falling. In November 1860, Lincoln wins the election. Then, just weeks later, on December 20th, South Carolina becomes the very first state to secede from the Union. Boom. That triggers an immediate chain reaction. By early 1861, so just a few months later, 6 more southern states secede and join up with South Carolina to form the Confederacy. And then, by April 1861, the tension just completely snaps. Fighting officially breaks out at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Armed conflict became a reality, and the American Civil War had begun. All of this, from an election to a full-blown war, happened in a span of barely 5 months. It spread like wildfire.
Okay, time for a quick mental check. Consider this your homework for today's explainer. Make sure you can confidently answer these key questions. First, why did Lincoln's victory upset the South so much? Second, who seceded first? Third, what exactly does secession mean? Fourth, why did the South feel entirely politically powerless? And finally, how did this whole 1860 election spark the Civil War? If you can answer these 5 questions, you've absolutely nailed the history of this critical period.
Let's wrap things up with part 5. Education needs morality.
If you bite and devour each other, watch out or you will be destroyed by each other. This is a profound truth from Galatians 5:15, and honestly, it perfectly captures this entire era. Think about it. When disagreements grow so incredibly deep that groups completely stop listening to each other and instead just act purely out of fear and anger, well, destruction naturally follows. The North and the South, they stopped listening. They began to bite and devour each other politically, and then tragically, physically on the battlefield. The call for us to be peacemakers is all about valuing others and actually seeking understanding so we can prevent this exact kind of destruction.
And really, this is the core philosophy behind the HeroesMart Academy Godly Learner series. Education absolutely must be intertwined with biblical morality. Why? Well, because being book smart without morality usually just leads to choices that hurt people. History is literally full of brilliant minds making disastrous, destructive decisions, all because they lacked a solid moral compass. Grounding our learning in spirituality, just like Romans 8:6-7 promises, it doesn't just make us smarter, it offers a profound peace of mind. A peace that, as we've seen, was so desperately missing in America back in 1860.
So I want to leave you with this final, really vital question to think about. Will you use your education to be a peacemaker, or will you let division win? As you continue to study history and grow your knowledge, just remember that you always have a choice in how you apply it. I challenge you to choose to seek understanding and build bridges. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible chapter of American history with me today. Keep seeking peace, and I will see you next time.